Okay, guys, I want to talk about the issue of the strike today, give you some idea, some background here on this. As you know, the strike is the great bête noire of the bourgeoisie. They're afraid, petrified of rioting workers and so forth. And just remember, the strike is one step below a revolution. It's a indication of some serious dissatisfaction with what's going on. Now, generally, we tend to think of strikes as sort of one-sided. It's the working class, miners, or whoever it happens to be, auto workers who down tools and march off the job and demand better pay or better working conditions. And that's, in general, that is an acceptable way to look at it. But there are also strikes by capital, by management, and some of you will have seen those more recently in sports. I think it wasn't the ice hockey season a couple of years ago stopped because of a lockout. A lockout is a strike by capital. Now it's not that easy to get sympathetic with one bunch of millionaires fighting with a bunch of billionaires, but the reality is that strikes by capital do occur. Now, realistically, they occur in a much more subtle fashion, and it's sort of not polite to mention the ways in which they occur because, after all, it is not a nice thing to talk about. Probably the most common way in which strikes of capital occur is disinvestment, a refusal to upgrade plant and machinery in a particular town, a particular community, a particular industry, and eventually that goes away. Or the second version of that will be that you export the jobs. You shut your factory down in California or Texas or Nevada, and you open it up in Taiwan or Mexico or in Mauritius or wherever it happens to be. And you export the jobs and everything is gone. That's a strike as well. But realistically, since we're all respectable people here, the type of strikes we're talking about are strikes by working people. Now, they've been around for a long time, and in many ways it is the combined unity, the unity of working people to try and fight for better working conditions, safer working conditions, improved payment, improved treatment, and so forth. That's at the core issue of the strike. Now, the strikes come about in industrial settings for particular reasons. Before there was a large-scale industry, there weren't any strikes, obviously. There were some small shutdowns and so forth. But in the pre-industrial era, what you had were skilled workers, guilds, and sometimes they might go on strike, and there's famous cordwainers. A cordwainer is a shoemaker. The cordwainers went on strike, and going way back, the Statute of Artificers forbade working people from going on strike. But when industrialization occurred, along with industrialization went this other phenomenon, de-skilling. And where you had small-scale production by artisans and they were controlled by guilds, now you have a movement towards industrial manufacturing, and you don't need highly skilled workers. Well, skilled workers could always sort of control things. They always had some sort of ability to control their working conditions and their pay. When you have no skill and you're up against the man in terms of dealing with management, what weapon do you have? What choice do you have? What tool do you have to advance your interests? And that's where the strike became a big deal, with industrialization and with de-skilling and that sort of issue generally. Now, de-skilling didn't just apply to crafts. It's applied all over the area, and probably the current areas where you'll see it happening will be in, for example, medicine. Highly paid specialization in medicine is radiology, very highly paid. But a radiologist reads screens. They read shots of your body. And, you can do that now. You can send a scan to India and get it back in a few minutes or an hour for $20. So doctors are going to go through de-skilling. In education, de-skilling and the sort of mass industrialization will be the MOOCs, the massive online courses. Lawyers will go through some sort of threats to their guild. And the one that two that have sort of lost it, two specialized types of employment that have lost their ability to control. Accountants, now they're sort of regular employees, and engineers who used to have a tremendous degree of control. Now they're just another group of employees. So it's not just working class people that have been subjected to sort of the stresses and strains of industrialized and globalized society. It's everybody gets to face that sort of thing. But what happened with working people is that in a social Darwinist era, when the belief was that if you're on top, then God wanted you there, and if you weren't on top, then either God didn't want you there or you didn't work hard enough. And you had this awful sense that you weren't going to make it. And if you did make it, you didn't care about what happened to anybody else. So unions came into existence, and industrial unions in particular started using the strike as a weapon to force management to pay attention to them. So the first strikes are about recognition. We want to force you to recognize us, to negotiate for this group of employees. That period in modern America was sort of settled by 1935 by the passage of the Wagner Act, which essentially said, yes, collective bargaining is good public policy. We want to have a vehicle where employees have a right to join and form a union, which will then have a responsibility to bargain for those people. And this is public policy. We're not doing it out of any sense of fairness in that. We're doing it because, in a sense, we've been forced to do this. This is what people want. And so those sorts of recognition strikes sort of, to a large extent, went away. And then the strikes became fights over the distribution of dollars. If I get a pay raise, then your return, your investment, is not going to be as great. And so you have those sorts of strikes. The public sector, the strike issue has been magnified out of all reality because it doesn't operate like that at all. You do have strikes, or you used to have some strikes in the public sector, but they're informational, and they're very, very seldom long-term. Teachers, if they were to go on strike, will pick a couple of days in September, although probably realistically August now as schools are going back early. You're doing it to send a message. Nobody's going to go on a picket line for months and months and months, or at least it's extraordinarily unusual to do that. Police will have what they call blue flu. They call in sick. Although there was an interesting case, and I guess it's 25 years ago now, police in Corona went on strike, and they all went to Arizona or Nevada. They went out of the state, where they couldn't be served with an injunction ordering them to go back to work because it was a local matter. But police and fire are generally not permitted to strike. Other public employees they're allowed to under certain sorts of conditions. Teachers can strike, but is it good public relations to strike? Well, it depends on the set of circumstances. And you're probably going to see more strikes as we're getting out of the recession. And as you know, of course, the faculty and the CSU faculty with CFA have taken a strike vote. So what I would like you to understand about the strike issue, though, is the difference between the public and the private sector. In the private sector, it was about recognition initially. In the public sector, you really don't have much recognition issues. By and large, employee associations are recognized, and they're given the rights to do representative work, except in some states, of course. And on the economic fight that strikes exist for, the weapon that they are, in fact, plays out slightly differently. As I said, some public employees are legislatively prohibited from going on strike. Others are permitted to go, and it's a sort of a vague issue as to whether it's a legal strike or not. In California, the no governor on the right, no Republican governor has ever been able to get a ban on public employee strikes. And on the left, and the Democrats, no Democratic governor or legislature has ever been able to get an explicit legislative statement saying that strikes are legitimate. So the courts decide. And in some cases, a more liberal court will say, yes, it's a protected activity and you can go on strike. Or the conservative court will say, no, you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. So it's pretty much up in the air. But for the most part, you don't have the sorts of strikes that existed in the private sector. You don't have these long strikes, long dragged out strikes with sort of a subtext of perhaps there might be some violence.